Navigating retro imports. Key insights for importers. Welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we will be delving into the world of importing vintage and retro items into the USA. Importing these unique and nostalgic goods presents its own set of challenges and considerations. So, if you're an importer looking to bring vintage and retro items into the USA, this guide is for you. Understanding vintage and retro items. Vintage items typically refer to products that are at least 20 years old and have gained value due to their age or historical significance. Retro items, on the other hand, are new items made to resemble or invoke a particular era or style from the past. Research import regulations and restrictions. Before importing vintage and retro items, it's crucial to research the specific import regulations and restrictions that may apply to these goods. Certain vintage items, such as endangered species products or cultural artifacts, may have strict import controls. Customs documentation. Accurate and complete customs documentation is essential when importing vintage and retro items. This includes commercial invoices, packing lists, certificates of authenticity, if applicable, and any other necessary documentation required by customs authorities. Verification of authenticity. For vintage items, it is important to verify their authenticity to ensure compliance with customs regulations and avoid potential issues. This can involve obtaining certificates of authenticity or consulting with experts to validate the age and origin of the items. Harmonized System (HS) Code classification. Proper classification under the Harmonized System (HS) code is crucial when importing vintage and retro items. The HS code determines the applicable duties, taxes, and any additional regulations that may apply to the specific category of goods. Appraisals and valuation. For vintage items of significant value, obtaining professional appraisals can help determine their customs value accurately. This valuation information is crucial for proper customs declaration and calculation of duties and taxes. Antique versus vintage. Distinctions between antique and vintage items are critical when it comes to import regulations. While vintage items are typically at least 20 years old, antiques are generally considered to be items that are 100 years or older. Different regulations may apply to importing antiques. Imported wood goods and sites. Importing vintage and retro items made of certain types of wood, such as rosewood or ebony, may require compliance with the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES. Verification and appropriate permits may be necessary. Importer Security Filing (ISF). Importers bringing vintage and retro items into the USA must fulfill the Importer Security Filing (ISF) requirements. ISF collects specific information about the imported goods, their origin, and the parties involved in the transaction to enhance customs security. Managing customs duties and taxes. Importers should be aware of the customs duties and taxes that apply to imported vintage and retro items. Duties are generally calculated based on the customs value, while taxes may vary depending on the category of goods and the country of origin. Trade agreements and preferences. Explore if any free trade agreements or preferential trade programs apply to the vintage and retro items you plan to import. These agreements can reduce or eliminate duties for certain goods, providing cost-saving opportunities for importers. Packaging and shipping considerations. Proper packaging and handling of vintage and retro items are crucial to prevent damage during transit. Importers should work with reputable shipping companies that specialize in handling fragile or valuable goods. Intellectual property rights (IPR) protection. Importers must respect intellectual property rights when importing vintage and retro items into the USA. Ensure that the items do not infringe upon copyrights, trademarks, or patents of others to avoid potential legal issues. Cultural heritage and heritage laws. Be aware of heritage laws and regulations that protect cultural artifacts and historical items. Some vintage items may qualify as cultural heritage and require specific permits or compliance with heritage laws. Collaboration with customs brokers and experts. To navigate the complexities of importing vintage and retro items, it is recommended to work with experienced customs brokers and experts. They can provide guidance on customs regulations, documentation requirements, and ensure compliance with import procedures. Record keeping and documentation retention. Maintaining thorough records of the entire import process is crucial. Keep copies of all customs documentation, invoices, certificates, and any other relevant paperwork for future reference and potential audits. Continuing education and research. As an importer of vintage and retro items, it is essential to stay updated on changing customs regulations and import requirements. Regularly research industry trends, attend trade shows or conventions, and consult experts to keep your knowledge current. Environmental considerations. When importing vintage and retro items, be mindful of environmental considerations. Some items may contain hazardous materials or components that require proper handling, disposal, or compliance with environmental regulations. Returns and refunds. Have a clear policy in place for returns and refunds of vintage and retro items. Understanding customs regulations and procedures for handling return shipments can help facilitate the process and minimize potential complications. Compliance with consumer safety regulations. Ensure that vintage and retro items comply with applicable consumer safety regulations in the USA. These regulations may include product safety standards, labeling requirements, and restrictions on certain substances or materials. Market research and pricing considerations. Conduct market research to gauge the demand and pricing of vintage and retro items in the USA. Understanding the market can help you make informed decisions regarding pricing, marketing, and positioning of these unique goods. Ethical considerations. Always consider the ethical implications associated with the vintage and retro items you import. Be conscious of labor practices, fair trade principles, and environmental sustainability to align your business with responsible and ethical sourcing. Collaboration with trusted suppliers. Work with reputable suppliers and vendors when sourcing vintage and retro items. Verify their authenticity and legitimacy to ensure the quality and integrity of the products you import. Thank you for joining us in this guide on importing vintage and retro items into the USA. Navigating customs regulations requires careful attention to detail, compliance with import requirements, and proper documentation. Stay tuned for our upcoming videos, where we continue to provide valuable insights on customs brokerage. Until next time.